Hello, I'm Brian Elkins, and I'm doing my speech here today on hallucinogenic drugs. Drugs are bad. This is a statement we've all grown up and learned throughout times in our lives. Propaganda is used to convince us that these drugs are going to have horribly negative effects if we use them. However, hallucinogenic drugs, such as acid and mushrooms, can actually have educational, even medical benefits. I'm here today to tell you that hallucinogenic drugs have benefits to those who use them responsibly and in a controlled environment. This is an extremely controversial statement because people argue that people use the drugs recreationally and what determines a responsible, controlled environment. Responsible means people are not interested in using the drugs recreationally. They don't want to have fun. They're interested in the educational or medical purposes of them. The controlled environment means that the patients have a babysitter to watch over them in case of undesired effects, and the environment and atmosphere is predetermined and controlled. When these conditions are met, the experiences with the drugs have benefits to those that use them. I'll back up this claim by stating that many people have educational experiences in expanding their mind when using hallucinogenic drugs. According to Dr. Alicia Ebbett, hallucinogenic drugs distort perception of reality and cause altercations to our senses. She also goes on to explain the term mind expansion comes from the drug's ability to unlock the unconscious mind that would otherwise be inaccessible. This is a reason why people are interested in the drug's effects. They don't want to have fun. They want to focus more on the growing experience. They want to learn more about themselves and why they think the way they think. During the counterculture in the 60s and 70s, many people used acid as used for mind exploration. It shows hallucinogenic drugs can help people find why they think the way they think and act the way they do. Another effect of the hallucinogenic drug is the altercation of our senses. It serves as another educational benefit because it enhances the user's creativity through different perceptions of reality. In essence, hallucinogens help people to grow internally and explore who they are, why they think the way they do, and act the way they do. These are effects that people seek when using the drugs responsibly. Hallucinogens can also have medical benefits. According to medical research done in Switzerland, doctors have been using psychedelic psychotherapy to treat patients with terminal illness. These studies were used to help patients come to terms with their imminent mortality and improve their quality of life. This shows the benefit medically because these people are allowed to live their lives out the way they want to, instead of worrying about their impending death. They are also growing in popularity and use for treatment of depression and post-traumatic stress syndrome. An article in the New York Times stated that cyclopin was used on Dr. Clark Martin when treated for his chronic depression. He quotes the experience as being one of the greatest experiences of his life. He stated that it improved his relationship with his friends, his family, and improved quality of life by curing his depression. He spent his entire life treating people for depression, but he could not cure his own depression until he was able to go through this experiment. Before hallucinogens became popular with counterculture, they were at the forefront of brain science. They were used to help scientists understand the consciousness of how the brain works. Professor Roland Griffiths at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine in Baltimore recently published a study of 36 healthy volunteers who were given psilocybin, which is a drug, the hallucinogen found in mushrooms. The participants' ages ranged from 24 to 64 and none of them had taken hallucinogens before. When the group were interviewed again, 14 months after the experience, 58% said they rated the experience as being among the 5 most personally meaningful experiences of their lives. 67% said it was in their top 5 spiritual experiences, and 64% said it had increased their well-being or life satisfaction. These studies indicate how the use of hallucinogenic drugs under the right conditions can have profoundly positive effects on the subjects. It's also another fact that surprises many people is that hallucinogenic drugs such as LSD and shrooms are surprisingly non-toxic to the human body. According to the Good Drugs Guide, LSD is one of the least toxic chemicals known to man and would have taken several hundred times the recommended dosage to overdose on it. They also state that mushrooms are less toxic than aspirin. As you can see, hallucinogenic drugs have positive effects educationally and medically, and should be allowed for responsible use. All the dangers from propaganda against these drugs come from using them recreationally, and they should be allowed for growing experiences.
All right. You ID the subject, that's okay. The claim is clearly identified. It does have some multiple conditional statements in it, though, that makes it a little more complex, and it does suggest some hedging on your part, which is not automatically a bad thing. It's a qualifier in the argument, but it does mean that your evidence really has to apply to those qualified conditions that you're talking about. And it sounds for the most part, like your evidence does that. You've got the example of the one doctor treating the depression, and the people who were studied in the psychiatric situation and given the access to the mushrooms. It's not like they're all sitting around getting high. All right, so some of your evidence, most of your evidence applies to those situations. That's pretty good. Structurally, there's not really a setup of what the content is going to be at the beginning of the speech. While I'm listening to the presentation, I do hear a couple of points that could be secondary claims or transition phrases. I usually thought they were secondary claims, but there's no highlighting of them. There's no numerical structure, so I don't think you're helping the audience who's listening as much as you could, and all it would take would be a little bit of extra signposting there to make it easier to remember what the points were. At the end, he didn't do quite as much as the last speaker at trying to, or the first speaker that we had tonight, trying to kind of recover the structure. You had a little bit of a summary that would help us figure out what those secondary points were, but like I said, it was not as extensive as it probably could have been, and you'd have fixed that problem more if you had done the signposting in the body of the speech. You did a good job citing the sources of your evidence for the most part. I think your evidence also meets the conditions that you set up for the presentation pretty well. I'm not sure that it's always convincing. You've got one example of somebody who treated their depression, and then you've got one study with 36 people, and half of them self-report that they had some important, significant breakthrough as a result of this. Not to be snide about it, but I can just imagine the response speaker saying, okay, so who do we have the testimony of that supports this position? A bunch of people who are under the effects of a hallucinogenic drug. And maybe perhaps their opinion is not the one that's most accurate to look at in this particular context. So that's one of the problems with this kind of information, because it's hard to measure the impact that it's going to have on somebody's insight or on their creativity or on setting free their minds, all those kinds of stuff. It's always about maybe a placebo effect would get the same kind of result. I don't know, but I think you set up an interesting argument here. You stuck to that argument pretty well. You found some evidence that supports it. I'm not sure the evidence is always convincing on those points, and I thought you did a nice job presenting it for the most part. All right, thank you. Oh, one other thing at the end. It does sound like you go back to making a policy claim right at the end instead of just sticking to the claim of fact. All right.